Hello, everybody. I'm back. I'm back with another episode of Intercultural Conversations, and I've been feeling so motivated to continue to do this because I feel I'm just so. I feel my passion for this growing with every episode. So, yes, and today I'm extremely excited and a little bit nervous also because it's about a conversation that is close to my heart, but I'm still figuring out. That is romantic love. But we're going to speak about it in an intercultural context today. But before I do that, as usual, I'm going to be playing a song. Now, the song is a German song because one of our guests today is German and the other is going to be married into a German family. What I try to do is I try to be as stereotypical as possible because I can use my advantage as an interculturalist to say that I'm generalizing and not stereotyping. And this song has nothing to do with romance, and I'm sure of that. So before I add the guests, I'm going to surprise them with this song. Just a second. I do for a fact. Can you hear the song? Neela Doyle. I know this song has nothing to do with love. We're going to take this as a comment on what is happening in the world today. And we're going to use your relationship to make that comment. Do you know this song, Nilo?
Put it up a bit. I know what you're going to play.
It's Nuft Ballon. Nuft Ballons?
You don't hear it here.
You don't hear it here.
You mean 99 Luftballons?
Yes.
You want to sing that?
No, I didn't see Luft. Not going to sing that.
Yeah, it's like somebody playing Bole Chudia for me, you know. Of course, this song was, yes, basically against war, but with a beat that's this.
Thanks for putting box.
It is generalizing.
It's generalizing when I do it, Nilo, not when you do it. It's still stereotyping even if you're German. So hi, thank you for being here. Thank you so much. Can everybody hear me clearly? Am I audible? Is everything good? Can you all hear me?
We can hear you.
Can you hear us?
Okay. Can everybody else hear me too?
Yeah.
I think yes, largely yes. I'm going to assume yes. So before I actually introduce you all, and before I start off with anything, I'd like to start with a quote by Rumi. It says, "Your task is not to seek love, but to seek within yourself the barriers that you've built against love." Yes. I'll repeat that again. Your task is not to seek love, but to seek within yourself the barriers that you've built against it. And I think my personal journey with love has been actually become more introspective as I've grown. And I'm just figuring out the barriers that I have within me that are against love. And when, as an interculturalist, I look at intercultural relationships, it just makes me realize then you're not only looking at your own barriers, but the barriers of your partner. You know, it could be cultural barriers, it could be some personal biases that you're looking at, and also understanding of your partners. And that's an interesting and beautiful thing to see, right? In those differences, you kind of find a place to foster love still. And that's going to be our topic of conversation today, you know, intercultural relationships.
Very good.
Amazing. Love the
And and who better than to have Doyle and Neil to speak about this. So a little bit about them. Doyle is a creative director.
Our first conversation as a couple in Instagram.
But before that, I need to uh, tell who y'all are as individuals before I speak about y'all as a couple. So Doyle is a creative director and a visual artist. And it's not only because I know her, but I've also seen her work. And I think her work usually gets titled as weird or unique, rather. And I don't think it's unique. I think sometimes it depicts the absolute truth, and that can be very scary for people sometimes. So they just brand it as what they want to. And we're also joined by Neil. Neil is an interdisciplinary artist and he's a music composer. And how I look at Neil is like Neil is blind to me because the way he perceives sound or the way he he listens to sound is it requires so much attention that you really need to be blind in order to just a second there. Um, is Neil audible to you, Sunita?
I haven't been talking, Sunita.
So yes, and I think Neil's work is so attentive, and he made me hear my city in a different way. I always thought I could understand my city. He made me listen and hear about my city and my surroundings, and the way he actually sees harmony in the places I see chaos. So here are two artists who are not only partners in life, but are also going to be collaborators, artistic collaborators. And one of their major collaborations for me is their journey of their relationship and the marriage that they're going to have. And, this conversation is going to be of their understanding of themselves as individuals and themselves as individuals in a relationship also, coming from different cultures and backgrounds. So yes, thank you. Thank you, Doyle and Neil, for being here. And if y'all don't mind, I'm going to jump right into the questions. Is that okay?
Back to the song, no. Thank you, Pratha, for first introducing us so beautifully. I think it's a bit overwhelming, but it's also because I think you're a keen observer. I think it takes a lot of empathy to see people that clearly. And so thank you.
Yeah, and I think you're especially good at you're observing but also listening. I feel like from your birthday we still have something that I need to do with you because Pratha invited us to gift her something and show her something of our world. And I promised her that I'll take her through the city and show her different places. And that's still on the list.
Yeah, I'm waiting for that to happen. So, yes, jumping right into it. So, Doyle and Neil, actually, you all met in New York, if I'm not wrong. And you all both just came from such different cultures, right? America as a culture was something that's very different from where y'all grew up and from where y'all came from. So y'all met there. Do you think the differences in your culture or the fact that y'all came from outside in a culture that's completely different to yours helped y'all foster a relationship or helped y'all understand each other better or even helped y'all develop love?
I'm going to say first.
I know for me, and I mean, we've spoken about this, right? So first of all, being in America, we were young children who were trying to find ourselves and our way in a city that promises a lot, right? But one of the things that I think I, as an individual, missed was home. And because Neil and I both come from very different cultures, sure, but at the same time, we both have very sort of solid family relationships, and the idea of home for us personally is very similar, right? So the safety and the sort of this gut feeling that you have of safety, I think that was missing for me for sure in New York, right? Like it's a little bit like your head is everywhere and you're meeting everybody and you're doing all these things, but there is a place of sense I think only at least at the time, I figured only home gave, right? Or only your parents, or only your very close ones. And I don't want to give America that much credit, but because we were thrown into a culture where we missed familiarity and we missed safety and we missed having a core and roots.
Yes.
I think that helped both of us sort of find that with each other, because that, I mean, you would think, oh, it's so different, but in reality, I think our source was very similar, right? And so I do think that.
I think so, yeah. I think that was a bit deeper. I think that was a bit in also. I feel like that developed. I think one thing that also happened is that in a way, the places that we left were places where we also felt like outsiders, I would say. And then and then New York, I guess, gave the opportunity for both of us to tap into a place where we were more of where we more felt organic, and it felt more natural to be in a surrounding where people are weird from different backgrounds, cultural backgrounds, and cultural meaning from all different spaces, all different influences. And then I think being in that space and being as free as we were, or as maybe also innocent, then I think that also gave us the space to be very natural with each other, which was then one big layer. And then the other layer was, let's say, this element where a city like New York takes away your grounding, just because there's so much happening. It's on a very high level and a very high pace. And then that's also something that Mumbai has. But then I think that grounding, we were able to give each other somehow because of, I guess, our cultural backgrounds. So I feel like that was like another additional puzzle piece, or like a Lego piece, that was like also there. So we had different constructs, and then I feel like that was another construct next to the construct of actually knowing each other's culture to a degree, because of me having a background in India, and also, let's say, a German side that I recognize in Doyle, and then but also
Doyle is like, I have a German side.
The part where we could just be free and live out and these things.
I think that's very key. I think New York, we weren't othered in New York, right? So I think it was actually more difficult to relate to people in India before I left, because the feeling of othering was so much. And, then othering comes with labeling and, like you said, but with us, I think because that layer of othering was removed, because we met in a context where we were free to be who we were, and then finding that core was, it's not easy to find that that center that easily.
Yes, and that's so interesting. You would rather feel that you wouldn't be othered in a culture that raised you, and then you go miles away from your culture, and that's when you find acceptance, and in this case you also found love. So somewhere in the differences you all found common ground, and that's something that's,
I think the choice to New York was may have been somewhere obvious, but it wasn't necessarily obvious, especially with our individual paths. And that's why I think it's not like, oh my God, we're going to New York, like the stereotype of it, but it was that individual path, I would say, which then kind of met in that city with our backgrounds, and then we're like, let's do this.
Good. And talking about individuality, actually, and that was supposed to be my next question, is that Doyle, you and I, we were talking about how the creatives, the ad for this particular talk should be. And usually when I post ads for this talk, it's basically me in one place and my guests all combined in one picture. But Doyle and Neil were very specific that they wanted separate photos. Like, yes, we are one in union and on paper, but please have separate photographs, And I think that's a reflection of how you want to be first viewed as individuals and then as partners, right? And the thing is, well, India is such a relationship-driven culture, wherein the idea of marriage and togetherness is about basically oneness. If you're getting married, you're becoming one. You have one last name, and everything is then shared, and everything is between those two people, but it's still one. So both, like, what kind of notions about marriage, Doyle, did you grow up with, and Neil, did you grow up with, that were maybe somewhere similar but different also?
I mean, first of all, I didn't want a picture with him because he's not as photogenic as I am.
That's not true. Look at him.
No. But it's a very good question. I actually have a poem. I told you there's a Rumi poem, which my mother-in-law read at a significant moment that Neil and I had, and it's amazing how much, and or like how she was able to observe this, because it's always something that we felt. And I mean, another sort of segue in this is that women especially feel like they need to bind with their partner to be in a marriage. I don't know if, and maybe you can tell us if that's wrong, but like, I think women especially become, there is this, you join your last name, you change your last name. Like, men don't change their last names, and I think women go to men's house, and and I think that's true for many cultures, not just Indian culture. And the reason why I was comfortable sort of getting into this union or this relationship, and more importantly this marriage, is because I did not have to separate myself. I had to take parts of myself away, or be with him to be with him, So the idea was always to remain individuals that help each other in each other's journey. And I think this poem, I find it very moving, and it's of course Rumi, and it's nothing like it's so unique, but
Let me finish the sentence.
Oh,
It is Khalil Gibran.
Oh, it was Gibran.
But another one of the big ones.
Sorry. It's a long poem, but
Wait, the main thing. From seeing love, you must choose give your heart's love. Is the wrong one?
No, okay.
The last one.
So like, okay, just the end of the poem is, give your hearts, but not into each other's keeping. For only the hand of life can contain your hearts. And stand together, yet not too near together. For the pillars of a temple stand apart. And the oak tree and the cypress grow not in each other's shadows. And this is why the poem is called On Marriage by Khalil Gibran, actually. I don't know, I thought Rumi, but I think this is just such a good sort of introduction to the ethos of our marriage or of our union, I think,
Yeah. I think it also has a little bit to do with that to some degree we also play with stereotypes. And I think the stereotype that comes up already with marriage is enormous, especially also in our friend circles and even in closest friends. And in India especially, it's kind of like there's a stereotype about marrying that like as soon as you've married, there's an end to something and a beginning of something new, which is not wrong. And the idea of what that new thing is and that old thing is something that we don't necessarily subscribe to, especially subscribe to. And also something that we're excited about creating new, just from who we are. And then let's say you have those two pillars. And I think that's why we always thought, okay, we need to also make that clear to people, And that was maybe a reason for me where I was a little bit anxious about, let's say, marrying, to be quite honest. But at the same time, I felt like for us it was rather clear, and then it was more an idea of what the outside world had. And then I think that my mom read that was then really like for us,
that we're able to live that out. Because it's one thing to have it as a concept, right? And it's another thing out, and then to have someone so close to you notice that about you was really great. And just also going back to this idea of course there's difference in cultures, in the cultures and what marriage means in these cultures, right? And India, of course, I mean, the ideas are very well defined, and they're almost subconsciously followed, right? And even if you want to make a different choice, I feel like when you do get to a certain age, because there is so much noise around you, you're like, oh, well, I must be getting married now. You know, like maybe I need to do that, but maybe in your personal journey, you're not there yet, right? For us, there was definitely, especially this idea of like what a marriage is for me and what a marriage is for him, and when it needs to happen, and what marriage means to society. Because in ways, I mean, we're fooling ourselves if we say that we get married only for ourselves. Like, then we don't need to get married, you know. We get married also to be in social forms and to sort of very clearly define what that is, and you know. But
plus just on a level of let's say putting something into the world, and also something that is like a commitment. I think just understanding what commitment means and what that means in terms of the strength that it carries and the things that you can then learn about that in yourself. I think that was also something that we learned from.
Yeah, but and so much of that is conditioning, you know, conditioning while growing up, because I had a very certain idea about marriage, and I still do. The thing is that I've not understood it or deconstructed it yet. And it's going to be a process for me yet. But it's going to be a process for me, right? And that's the conditioning sometimes. If you have a certain idea, how difficult it is to get out of it, because any kind of change of idea is going to be difficult, is going to be a difficult process, because that means then you have to form ideas of your own about what marriage means, what relationship means, ideas that are different from, you know, what our culture has influenced us to believe. So I can completely understand. So is then your journey a process of creating a new culture of marriage for yourselves in that bubble?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think this all sounds super cool, but much more...
Oh, it doesn't? It doesn't to me.
Pillars that stand apart and hold something. I feel like that's one element of what our relationship is. The other one is like and we came up with this recently. That we said, actually, you know, when you have a bougainvillea and like on the top it's all wild and you have all these leaves and flowers and colors, but when you come down, it literally swirls into each other very deeply and goes into the earth. And I'm like, you know what? Get the pillars.
Yeah, we're just being cool. Actually, we're not that.
We're this way.
Put us into one image, you know, mix it in it on Photoshop.
Yeah. It sounds cool when Khalil Gibran says it, but then when you actually have to act upon it, you're like, no, please don't.
Moments, right? I think it is definitely, I mean, obviously we love each other, and obviously we've committed to be together. But at the same time, life has seasons, and in different seasons you want different things from each other. And then, like you said, of course, being from different cultures made it very obvious that we needed to come up with a new definition of what a marriage is, but very organically for us, because we're artists and because we live
it's easy to create for you.
Yeah, there's no distinction between life and art and how you're living it. You know, you have to live honestly. And in that honesty, it was very obvious that find something that is unique to us. Otherwise, it's very easy to get sucked into one or the other, and that can create a lot of friction. And I'm not going to say that it hasn't. It has. But it only solidifies your own, like the place that we can take strength from then is our pillar then, you know.
Yeah, and I think I'm very bad. My memory is not that good, but it reminds me very much of the poem that you had said like 5 minutes ago. Love, of course, is the place where you can recognize the walls, and then those walls. Whereas love can be in a relationship, but love can also be the passion and the thing that you're striving for personally. You know, he really meant it like this. I give him. Probably he meant it in tenfold other ways, but like, but I feel like there was a moment in our relationship where we also noticed, you know what, we're able to do that, and we have been doing that since the beginning. Where okay, if we recognize one of those boundaries, what did he call it? Boundaries?
Yes, barriers. Barriers within yourself.
when you recognize those barriers in your relationship, right? And when we recognize these barriers in ourselves, oftentimes they align, you know. And then maybe in the beginning we're just shouting at each other, nah, you do this and you do this, you know, and then we're like, 1 second, let's think back to
wait, maybe this is my bias. Maybe
next level.
Yeah.
And I think that's been a learning where we're like, ooh, this is actually cool, and it works with each other. And then we have,
and it's conducive to our personal growth, you know.
Yeah.
Nothing.
Personal growth is very important. Yeah. And actually, talking about barriers and conflicts within yourself, Nilo, you are, I don't know if you like being defined in that way, but you are half German and half Indian. Yes. You are half, you already knew this is coming. You are half German, half Indian. And just being, and that's your being, you know, that's what you are in a sense, superficially at least. Does that create conflict for you within yourself, especially being in this relationship where Doel identifies as being fully Indian, even though she's socialized around the world, but then I'm sure she feels her roots are Indian. So do you feel that conflict within yourself sometimes? Because I can't imagine how it is for you.
See, now, in the first part of the question, I got nervous and I got agitated. In the second part of the question, I got understanding that for somebody else it can be very different. In this case, so for me, I don't define myself as half Indian and half German, first of all. It's not even fully true if you go by the math, because my mom is half Indian and my German, of German origin, which makes me quarter. But this is not a cake show or something, you know. So that's not, let's say, that's what forms my identity. I can understand that somebody else, and like Doel in this case, that's the second part of the question, where I was like, oh, you know what, interesting. For her, being Indian means certain things of the culture, of her background, or of her identity, which I very much can understand, and then respect, right? And I see you there, and it's okay. Difference. My mom was telling me it's about seeing difference. But for me, I don't, like I said, I like identity. My identity is not half Indian, half German, but I would say I'm Indian. I'm also German. I am a tree, and I'm a plant, and I'm
a butterfly.
And a butterfly.
And a bird.
Pillar and a bougainvillea.
Exactly. So it's more about different parts of things that I would identify myself as, and being half sounds a bit like somebody else who thinks they are full. Problem with that. What makes you think that you're full? And I think I grew up also, having grown up in Germany, but having a lot of my family in India, made me feel very, very strongly connected to India. Plus, having my mom being Indian and having lots of Indian influences, or what I understood as Indian influences, in our day-to-day life. Also, I want to call it, or I often call it, oasis that we, let's say, had in a German linear thinking surrounding, because we were more like that. And then I think that for my brother and myself, that was always something that we strongly connected to. And also, if you look at my brother and me, he's blonde and blue-eyed. You know, I'm darker. So, are we any different by the math in terms of Indian? You know,
experiences.
At the surface, it looks like it.
Exactly. Well, our experience, we can equally feel Indian and feel German. And then also, I feel extremely strongly connected to, let's say, let's say, for example, my great-grandfather in India, in Calcutta, who had tea gardens and worked as a tea taster. And I feel connected to the idea of nuance that he must have had for tasting tea, but also the pride that he was carrying. Then also let's say, this idea of a sommelier, or I shouldn't call it like a sommelier. So that's something I look up in a way. But then also, let's say, the other side, whereas, I mean, you find both sides and both sides again, but these are parts of, in my Indian culture that I recognize and identify with. But then, or even my, like, as bland as my, you know, my dark hair. Okay. You know, does that, for the fully Indians, is that enough? No. You know, but then in Germany, let's say, my grandparents, their name was Ake, which means field, and they used to work with wine, you know, and the villagey ways that one talks with each other in a very grounded level, literally, was something that I also still feel very connected to, and something that is part of me. So I identify a lot of that as myself. And then just to give it, let's say, another level, I feel like, so that's just in terms of countries, but I don't like just defining myself by countries, or like saying, you know what, oh, this is me Indian, this is me that. But I'm like, okay, actually every step that I've taken in my life has added to who I am and to my intercultural personality.
Yeah.
You know, where culture doesn't just mean a country, but culture can mean family culture, it can mean
social
Yeah.
yeah,
food culture, it can mean like drinks culture, it can mean party culture, it can mean creative culture, it can mean so many things. You know, it can mean like wild culture, what you do when you're wild, you know, in your wild moments. And then I think this idea that something that I connect to very much is this idea of multitudes. You know, that multitudes, and that's been my topic last year, and just being able to say, you know what, you have so many multitudes and they make up who you are, you know, and then you can identify many of these things, but at the same time, you can also be different things on different days, you know, where you don't have to prescribe to a binary thinking of like, you know what, this is who you are, or you're that, you're either, and it's often wrong. More like, you know what, I'm a multitude of things. One day I choose to be this, the other day I choose to be this. One day I'm not able to be that, the other day I'm able to find something new. Maybe I'm confused one day, maybe I'm futuristic on another day, maybe I'm grounded, maybe I'm Indian, maybe I'm German, maybe I want to learn Hindi, maybe, you know. And then that is something that I feel very, I would say maybe because I grew up as a hybrid, I feel empowered by that, you know, where it's been like, you know what, you feel very clear about it, but I think it's been a topic that I've been thinking about a lot, and discerning with a lot, is discerning the right word? So that's something that I just feel connected to, you know, so.
Yeah. And the thing is, I think when people talk cultures, the immediate thing that comes to people's minds is national cultures, right? So it's about, so for you, it's not about you being Indian or German. You don't define culture in that way at all. So that creating a conflict within you, maybe it's a journey that you're still on, but then it's the other things that, or the hybrid culture that you created for yourself, being in that oasis in the small town of Nakinai, if I'm not wrong.
I mean, I've noticed Neil go through this process, and especially because he's been in India, and like, you know, because of the marriage, and because, you know, of course, I'm fully Indian. But I don't think that being fully anything creates any less conflict within you, because I think the harsher you become about, or the more decisive you become about, this is who I am, the more conflict there is, because that you don't leave room for everything else that you can be, right? And so, I that's why I think it's important that, like, yes, obviously it's easier, and it's such a central topic for people who are hybrid and you know, or even hybrid relationships. But I do think that even people who feel very centered in a culture will feel friction, because the more you feel rooted, the more you realize that culture doesn't always travel with you. The culture doesn't always develop or grow or, you know, allow change that easily. So
the thing is that a lot of people derive their sense of self from culture. What you're saying is it's very essential that you derive your sense of self from within, from yourself, as opposed to everything from the surface. But a lot of people do derive their sense of self from culture, where they come from, what, you know, who raised them, the environment that raised them. So it becomes very difficult for them then to separate from that. But then I think Neil is on a different journey. Neil is on a journey of, you know, introspection and finding below the layers.
That's the other thing. That's why I think I connect with this idea of, like, you are not just one thing, right? Because that's a very limiting idea. That's leave growth. And then my feeling has been, especially speaking of culture and speaking of relationships, I think the one thing that I have understood more than anything else is that within us is so much more, even culturally. You know, you can be can subscribe to certain things and feel home with certain things, but you could also not feel home with certain things. And I certainly didn't feel home with a lot of things. And which is why we had to go away. But yeah.
Yeah, speaking of that, actually, so my next question was that is there any part that is the most challenging being in an intercultural relationship, and any part that's the most rewarding having to be in a relationship that, like Neil mentioned, had so many multitudes, but the different cultures, for me as an interculturalist, being the most obvious, So do you feel in this journey that there are some parts that are so challenging to understand because of where you all come from? Because you're also getting married now, and the marriage day is coming closer, and the closer it comes, the more you'll learn about each other's cultures also. So is there anything that causes, some kind of a challenge that you'll then sit and try and understand and deal with, and the other part that's extremely rewarding to you?
So challenging and rewarding, right?
There's definitely challenges.
There's definitely rewards.
I think there's both.
You can't help it. You have to say it.
I think so.
Just like in the personal journey, there are challenges and rewards. First of all, to go back to the Rumi thing, I think if you're opening up to love and you're opening up to who you are and what you want to do in life and what your purpose is or something, then there'll always be those challenges, and there'll always be those barriers that you're jumping over.
Yeah, but I think
in a relationship too.
Yes, very good. A lot of I will tell you about challenges.
He said, I'm very happy. There are no challenges. हम सब खुश हैं यहाँ पे. कुशल मंगल. Bye.
There are challenges. There's obviously challenges, and those challenges are. I can tell you what the challenge was for me, right? So, and I think it's very. I don't think it's unique to our situation. I think it's true for anybody who's in a relationship, and of course, it's a little bit of a longer distance to travel if the person is not from the same culture. But I think if you're with, let's say, if I were to marry someone who was Indian, I think the goal setting of like, okay, this is the age that you get married. This is the age that you do this. Then you have this. Then you have these rituals. Then you have this. And then after that, you have that. These things are so normalized, and it's it's so obvious because it's
norms. They're already built. There's like a template that you follow.
The process of it can be frustrating and rewarding at the same time, because what happens is that I can go into a feeling of like, well, how can you not understand that, I don't know, we need to go around the fire 7 times, in order to feel mad. Like, I need to go around the fire 7 times to feel married, and like, and like, why can't you just accept that? But on the other hand, in order to explain it to him, or in order for us to have a conversation about it, I need to first get clear on why, first of all, what these 7 running around.
Yes.
But also why it is important for me. Not just because it's socially subscribed, or not just because it's a cultural norm, but because what is it to me? What about my background? What about my feelings? What about my insecurities? What about what about me needs that in order to feel married, right? And I think what happens ultimately is the things that are the most challenging and most frustrating also become ultimately, after long conversations and a lot of introspection, things that are also the most rewarding, because I would have never thought about it. I'm like, okay, let's go around the fire. Let's get dressed and go around the fire,
But this made you think as well, because if you were with an Indian person, you wouldn't have thought about it till it was questioned.
Not just what it is, because that's easy, right? Like, you can Google it and be like, oh, okay, this is what this ritual means. But what does it mean to me? Am I doing 10,000 people have been doing it before me, or or am I doing it because I have a connection to it, and what is that connection? So,
I think so.
Did you feel that too, Neil? Did you feel that there were challenges almost at every step of discussing about the marriage or planning, wherein not every step, but that there were certain differences that you didn't really conform to, or you didn't understand because that's not something that was conditioned for you, or that's not how you were raised, for example. Or even, the other side around where you had to explain to Doyle what is important for you, your family, and your culture. No? Everything is all good. My life has no conflicts, Pratha. What do you mean?
First of all, I feel like these are 10 questions. I don't even know which one to answer or where I go. I can speak about multitudes.
About multitudes?
Says multitudes.
No.
No, I think it's the same thing.
It's the same. I think in the end, it's definitely. Yeah, I think it's
conflict leads to introspection.
Conflict leads to introspection, but also it's this idea of okay, what are the preconditions that you have that feel natural to you, but that may be a bias or something, unconscious bias maybe even. Whereas for me, this idea of marrying is something you do then, once you've reached it, once
what is it?
And then you can do the marriage, because it then obviously means that you have to have kids, and it means that you then obviously are going to start a family, and then again these things are like, just because I've observed that in society and maybe people who were interested in that or more adhere to these things for their own reasons, that was a thing where okay, that scared me a lot, and then I feel like her expectations or maybe her bias on or conditioning or her idea of how it should be, and then I saw okay, different to how I feel, so I had to go into my side and be like, why do I have a problem with it, or why am I conflicted with it? And then also, why am I not able to speak to many people about it, because most people kind of have that same idea often, so it kind of peers and stuff. So then it really was also a process of going inside and being like, you know what, okay, what part of it do I actually, and then it's like, oh my god, I do want to be with her, and it's so obvious that I love her to death and don't want, just can you imagine that we click in every way, and that like the future only makes sense. So then it wasn't it wasn't even a thought process, but you have to get yourself off your thought process to just, But then also some of those things, like I said, aren't kind of conscious, But I think,
And talking about process, so you all are both amazing creatives in your own right. Do you think your relationship helps y'all or aids y'all in your creative process? This is not necessarily a cultural question. This is just a question for you all, since you all have been on the journey of introspection because of your marriage. But do you think your relationship helps you with your creative process?
Just to, I mean, obviously, because we're introspective and because there is such a and it's almost a daily process, right? Nothing is a given. Nothing is like, okay, this is our every day is, and I think that obviously sort of informs our work, and we are more conscious about ourselves and our work in that process. But my personal process is, I feel like a reflection of the relationship. For me, I've worked around objects that have given forms. So like a very traditional given form, whether it's a table with 4 legs or whether it's a very classic men's blazer. And then to be able to turn it into something that is not that, right? In order to just for a moment to sort of shift yourself and to go into, okay, but what else could it be? Why is it just that, right? And so whether it's a blazer and whether, I tie something around it or whatever, I think ultimately a table doesn't have to have 4 legs. It can have a huge stone underneath it that balances it just right. And I think that's a metaphor for our relationship, because, there are no legs, and we are very much in the process of doing it our way. And so, it's living it out in all forms, and not every relationship allows that. I think you have to subscribe to things often.
Nope.
And then one of the things that then is something that is a challenge is definitely once you open it up, once the once the conversation that is, let's say, internal to us goes into the realms of society, I would say, when it reaches the family or the society or the friends of the friends, and then suddenly that is a new conversation because they ask questions and they're conflicted with certain ideas. And then it's a challenge because we are also, of course, affected by, let's say, what our families say and what our circles say, because these are our circles, these are the people we, let's say, interact with. And then that's a level of insecurity that comes in that we feel directly, And then that's something that we need to also discuss then always. And then we're like, you know what, okay, right now, are you kind of, what's this word? Solid, things that solidify in us rather than being fluent, and that happens all the time.
Yeah.
And then it's kind of a constant reminder to say, you know what, you have to tap that thing or like heat it up a bit if it's iced or whatever, figure out a way in the relationship or personally also to kind of keep things moving. In reflection and in kind of reverberation with the life that you're living in and with your with the contemporary world that you live in. And I feel like in terms of our work, that's especially something we try to engage with, like what is, okay, we understand the cultural part, we understand these things, we understand our personal preferences, but how does that
reflect back into society, right? Like what are we
and your work
in a contemporary place? Whereas in India at the moment, in Mumbai, of course you have the let's say you have a steep grounding in the culture, and you have a steep grounding in tradition, and these are beautiful things, also controversial things in parts, or difficult things, or can play out in difficult ways as we've also experienced. But at the same time, there's a very contemporary eye that's in India as well, and there are people who are from, who don't even see country borders anymore, who come to this place and exhibit places or show things or try to create spaces. And then these are all of our contemporaries, not just people or those people, but like all of them. And that's something that we're trying to create for our wedding also, where we're like, we don't just have, we call it like the aunties, we don't just have the aunties who are coming to the event, but also we'll have, let's say, somebody who is, I don't know, what else we say there?
I don't know, like a curator of a museum or a
curator of a contemporary art museum. That sounds a bit pretentious.
Yeah.
Just saying different people.
I think
you could have said interculturalist coming to your wedding, but but I'm also auntie, so can't help it. So, guys, we can go on and on, actually. I will never end this live. But before we actually do, there's one last question I ask all of my guests.
Can we ask
One
you
is... Sorry?
Can I ask you something back?
Yeah.
After?
After.
Yeah, sure. You can. You can answer this however you want, right? And I've realized that my word now is change. So if there's something within yourself or outside yourself that you would like to change, what would it be? Now, this is not like I want to change the world. I want to end world hunger. No, not necessarily that. If you want to do this, perfect. But something that you would want to change within you or outside you, what would it be? Or even in your relationship, for that matter, since we're talking about relationships.
It's a big question.
It is.
Is it awkward to have a moment of silence on this thing?
No, Doyle can sing till then.
Let's wait a second. Something we'd like to change. I have an answer.
I can also play a song till then.
Not the 99 Balloons move.
Hey, let me offend an entire country at once.
Something we'd like to change, right? Say everything constantly and as long as we can, in terms of if we're able to, let's say, have this journey in ourselves, and that what do you call it, reflection, that reflection that we try to put into the things that we do, but also in our relationship, and that we recognize these things within ourselves and are able to do that. There must be a purpose to also show that to people. I guess that's also maybe why you were interested to speak to a couple, one or the other, but that there is some value that you can take from it. And something that I thought about was that there's this element about this difference between whether you look at something as just culture A meets culture B, to seeing something like, oh my God, there's so many parts of this. Because if you are so many parts, there are so many more people that can connect to whatever you're doing. And that, I feel like, brings you to a place of inspiration. And if you're in that place of inspiration, you're already opening up towards something that is not closing off and not getting rigid.
Something that's changed.
Yeah. And you're subject to change constantly then. That's amazing. Beautiful.
I think that... Can I steal his answer?
Mic drop.
Mic drop. I shouldn't answer. This is very good.
Unless it's better than that.
No, I do agree. I think to have the courage to change, I think that's what I want to change. Fearful thing to change. And if every day I can foster the courage to change, everything else is then easy. Because you're not bound to
anything. Yeah. Courage to change, courage to love, courage to put yourself out there. Little by little, hopefully, we'll get there. So yes, Nilo, you wanted to ask me something, apparently, before we left.
What do you want to ask her?
What you ask? Think of something cool.
Neil was like, I will only come on this show if I get to ask you something.
What do you want to change? Because I know that change is important for you and it's your North Star. Yeah. What is, it's not one thing, maybe you too, it's everything.
And maybe in the context of doing these intercultural conversations.
Yeah. I think more so doing, I can answer that more so with respect to these conversations. Because I think the place that we are right now, it's so essential that we first understand each other before coming to conclusions. Okay? And there is so much judgment and so much hate out there, and we are seeing this now very evidently. And my passion and my medium is culture, or to understand culture. And I feel, and it's for me, it has been evident when there are two people who are from different cultures who are finally given more context and are given more information or equipped with more knowledge about where each of them comes from. The bridge gets a bit smaller, So I'm not saying that this is going to, finally bring world peace. But my intention is to just at least change that mindset where people at least make an effort to understand each other culturally, because that's something that everybody draws so much identity from. And they draw so much of themselves from culture. So yes, that's the thing that I want to change. And that's the reason why I have this conversation. And hopefully with this, I'm able to get people from different countercultures or enemy cultures together and basically sit on a table and have a conversation, Noble. That's what I'm about. Sorry?
Noble cause.
Noble cause.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. But I'm so tempted to play 99 Notes for Loan before we leave.
Do it.
We were all in one house, guys. They needed to know.